back. You're watching Gravitas. French banking giant BNP Paribas has been accused of complicity in the 1994 genocide of the Tutsi minority in Rwanda. 3 non-governmental associations have accused the bank of financing the purchase of 80 tons of arms used to carry out the genocide by the Hutu regime. The organizations claim that the bank ought to have known the genocidal intentions of the government of the day. The groups went on to say that BNP authorized the transfer of funds to this regime in June 1994 despite a United Nations embargo, accusing it of complicity in the genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity. Remember, this is not the first time that BNP Paribas has been accused of violating embargoes. In 2014, it pleaded guilty to evading US trade embargoes in order to help clients in Sudan, Cuba and Iran, for which it agreed to pay a $9 billion penalty. The spokesperson of the bank now has refused to comment on the latest crisis and the charges rather, saying that he does not have sufficient details. Now, the lawsuit was filed in France by Sherpa, which defends victims of economic crimes. And the 4-month-long campaign, remember, led to the massacre of about 800,000 people, mostly from Rwanda's Tutsis. Here's a look back at what happened.
These names tell a story. Back in 1994, Rwanda, one of the smallest countries in Africa, saw the murder of more than 800,000 people. This Nyamata genocide memorial, built in the memory of the bloody 100 days in the history of Rwanda. The genocide left a deep scar in the turbulent history of the country, and more than 20 years later, several families are still reeling from the loss of their loved ones. So what led to this inhuman massacre? The beginnings of the genocide can be traced back to the death of Juvenal Habyarimana, the country's longest-serving president, who took power in a coup in 1973. It's not clear till date who shot down the plane President Habyarimana was travelling by, but his death did not come as a surprise. The worsening economic situation had contributed to Habyarimana's shrinking popularity, leading to refugees from the minority Tutsi community forming the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or the RPF, with the support of some moderate Hutus. The Hutus are the majority community in Uganda and enjoyed a better place in society since the colonial era. Driven by resentment, the RPF wanted to overthrow Habyarimana. They carried out several attacks till August 1993, but a peace accord was signed between Habyarimana and the RPF after months of negotiations. What followed Habyarimana's death was a bloody war between the Tutsis and the Hutus. The Presidential Guard began a vengeance campaign after Habyarimana's death. A wave of slaughter began, opposition leaders were murdered, and soon organized gangs joined in, killing the Tutsi community in large numbers. The Hutus saw mass murder as the only way to hold on to power, and even incentivized participants to kill the Tutsis. The RPF retaliated with an assault on government forces. The bloody war ended in July when the RPF captured Rwanda's capital, Kigali, leading to a ceasefire. There's a long history behind the animosity between the Hutus and the Tutsis. The lands of Rwanda witnessed 2 riots between the community before the mass genocides. The scars of the massacre are evident. A study claims that a quarter of survivors exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Bureau Report, WION.
Joining me in the studio is former diplomat Shankar Mukherjee, a man who spent more than a decade in various regions in Africa serving as an ambassador. Good evening and thank you for joining us here. Rwanda is already probing the possible role of 20 French army officials and other officials in this genocide, and now these charges come up. Is it fair to hold a bank accountable for how the money it lent to a regime was used?
If they knew what the purpose was going to be, if they had a reasonable knowledge of what the money was going to be used for, yes, I don't see why not. But I'd stretch that argument a little bit. If the bank lent money for the purchase of weapons that were used in the massacre, then there is absolutely no doubt in my mind, and I know Rwanda, I visited Rwanda 5 times. As you said, I've served in Africa more than a dozen years. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that it was done with the acquiescence, or maybe even the encouragement of the French government. The whole root of the genocide in Rwanda started with the turn of the century. If I can just give a little bit of background, the population of Rwanda is 84% Hutu, 15% Tutsi, and 1% people who are known as the Batwa or the Twa. Now, in 1884, at the Berlin Conference, when the European imperial powers just simply carved up the continent as they liked, because Africa for them was peopled by black people who were less than human, hewers of wood and drawers of water, as they were called. Germany became the colonial power in Rwanda, and later in the 1920s, the League of Nations awarded Belgium the rulership of Rwanda because it was already the colonial power in the Congo. The Belgians, this is actually colonialism at its which is always bad at its very worst.
The French also had great relations with Rwanda until 1994, their government has said.
Who?
The French.
Yes, of course. No, let me complete. The Belgians then decided that the Hutus were to be encouraged to be the dominant tribe out of purely racist reasons. They were tall, they had, handsome equiline features because they were supposed to have come down from Ethiopia. And the Hutus were relegated to, menial tasks, farming or whatever. So a minority Tutsi community dominated politics for a long time, of course under the Belgian tutelage. And the Belgian priests, Catholic priests, also had a very heavy hand in this encouragement of the racial divide and the hatred between the two tribes. What happened then was even worse, because in 1933, the Belgians insisted on a system of identity cards in which the racial origin, the ethnic origin of the people had to be mentioned, which means the Tutsis were identified as Tutsis and the Hutus as Hutus, which in fact was one of the reasons why the massacre took place so swiftly, because at the roadblocks, the Hutus who were doing the carrying out the genocide could stop people, and anybody whose identity card said Tutsi was slaughtered immediately. Anybody who said he did not have an identity card was equally quickly slaughtered. The French, when your report talked about
I'm sorry to interrupt. I have to ask you this because I'm being told we're running out of time, but I want to ask you, the BNP, this bank,
yes,
has violated trade embargoes, as we said, in the past, but that was against the US. Now it's a tiny country in Africa, and you're saying that the French government might be complicit.
Well, it'll never be proved, let's face it.
But what is the possibility, what is their hope of getting justice then, if that is the right word?
It will depend entirely on international pressure. The International Criminal Court is certainly not going to look at it. The International Criminal Court was given then split and given a special tribunal was formed called the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda under the UN aegis. It was a joke. It was a typical UN operation which spent a huge amount of money and over 10 years convicted 20 people, forcing Rwanda to use its own traditional system of justice and so on. So, Rwanda cannot force its way into getting compensation or punitive damages from the bank. But it'll all depend on what attitude the French government takes, if it wants to take the moral high ground, because they themselves had a very, very bad role to play in the genocide itself,
right,
Operation Turquoise, and because all they did was evacuate the expatriates. In fact, when there were couples where one was a African Tutsi and a white man or woman, They physically separated the black person, the black spouse, and left them behind. So it'll depend a lot on international pressure. It'll depend a lot on the attitude the French government takes, because I don't see a legal way in which you can charge the bank with war crimes, because certainly in the weeks and months leading up to the genocide, which was meticulously planned by the Hutus, the huge amounts of machetes were imported from China, guns, rifles, grenades, traditional weapons and knives. They were all stockpiled.
There are many more players, and there are many more who should be held accountable.
It's difficult to see how they will get justice, but one hopes so.
In hope we live, and we'll have to wrap it there. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for coming here and sharing those details with us.